Well, hello, this is Tosh Berman. This is Tosh Talks. And not that long ago, actually just a week ago, I did an episode on Orc Records, New York, New York. And this is sort of a companion piece to that book. Not officially, but same subject matter. It's a memoir by Richard Lloyd. And the book is called Everything is Combustible. It's Television, the band, CBGBs, and 5 decades of rock and roll. And Richard Lloyd was one of the 2 guitar players in the band Television. And as I mentioned, I am a huge fan of that band. I discovered them when they first came out in the 70s, and I actually purchased their record that was released by Orc Records, Little Johnny Jewell. And I was very impressed by that record because of the, well, it was the first punk rock record of sorts. And it's, though the music is technically, whatever that means, the word punk rock, it's just basically, well, it's just a great piece of music. 7 minutes of blissful music for me. And when I first heard it, I was totally taken by the 2 guitars working with each other and against each other, that one song, that one recording. And it builds up very slowly. And it's Little Johnny Jewell Part 1 and Part 2. So the 7-inch single, and you have to turn on the other side for Part 2, of course. And this continues on. And as I mentioned before in my other video, it's sort of like the same format or framework as James Brown's Papa Got a Brand New Bag, Part 1 and Part 2, or Hot Pants, Part 1 and Part 2. James Brown has a series of records that are like Part 1 and Part 2, issued as 7-inch singles. And Television is, well, they're very unique. One, they do have an image of sort of a hyper coolness, if anything. All of them are great looking. Sound-wise, of course, magnificent. But very little information about the band at the time. I mean, you read the interview with Tom Verlaine, the other member of Television, the main songwriter of Television. But very little information was issued from his mouth to the public. You don't know too much about his background. You don't know too much about his thoughts. And basically, when you read about him or Television, you know they were into poetry. You know he wrote poetry. You know he was sort of part of the Soho, New York, 70s, CBGBs, Bowery scene. But beyond that, compared to, say, somebody like Richard Hell, who was a bass player at Television one time, who you know a lot about and you know his writings, or even Patti Smith, who consistently articulated her past and the present at the time. But Verlaine was always a more mysterious figure. And it always strikes me, over the years, I mean, over like 30-something years, reading about Television or Tom Verlaine, and I read numerous memoirs about that time period by various people who lived the scene. Tom Verlaine always comes off as sort of a mysterious figure still. And, which of course makes it intriguing to me, that oddly enough, nobody has really captured, I believe, the essence of Verlaine. And Richard Lloyd, in his memoir, talks about his years with Television. And it's fascinating because even he, I feel, doesn't get a full picture of Verlaine and why he does and what he does. I presume he was sort of a little bit of a control freak of sorts, and not a little, but maybe a great control freak. But that is Tom Verlaine. Richard Lloyd, as a subject matter of this book, of course, his memoir, he's a fascinating figure. He's a brilliant guitar player, and he's also kind of metaphysical in a funny way, which was surprising, because I never think of Television or anybody in that New York punk rock world being metaphysical. And when I mean metaphysical, I'm not talking in a new age way. I'm talking more about of a person who's into, Lloyd was very much into science. He has a very sort of scientific mind. That's what I'm by reading this book. And the way he started playing guitar, he just sort of focused on the guitar for many years, which is not unlike other guitar players. But the way he looked at it was also like a mental meditation thing at the same time. And he's just very single-minded, just studied the guitar. And you know, I guess waiting for the moment to happen. And when the moment happens, when he met or saw Tom Verlaine play in a little club, I think Verlaine was playing electric guitar and singing. So sort of a, not an acoustic set, but a sort of a semi-acoustic set. So when Lloyd saw him, he said, bingo, you know, he got the whole picture of television, what this is, what that's going to be, and, you know, that happened. Richard Lloyd was also, at the time, or during the time, was a heavy drug addict, heroin. And that's another thing that, not surprising about the drug stuff, but the way he looks at drugs, I find it very fascinating. It sort of reminds me of William S. Burroughs in a way, that how Burroughs looked at his addiction. Lloyd did the same thing when there's actually a scene in the book where he talks about visiting a doctor and telling the doctor, you know, the situation he's in. And the doctor sort of gave him the 12-step, you know, he recommended the 12-step program, like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, NA. And Lloyd said, no. I'm not interested in that. I want to take drugs. What I'm interested in is why people are addicted. What is addiction? Can you tell me that? What is addiction? And so Lloyd's quest is always more intellectual and more sort of focused on just beyond being addicted to something. You actually want to know the nature of addiction. And I think his music is the same way. He does his music in the same sort of scientific manner where he's not like exact, but he's very focused on how that guitar is going to sound. And I think him and Verlaine had such a great relationship at the time because of Verlaine's kind of jazzier, noisier, expressive playing compared to Richard Lloyd's was very precise. Lloyd is very precise and very, you know, definitely rock and roll, but very classic rock and roll. But he played with Verlaine's world as well. So I look at television as being sort of a architectural landscape or a building. I think Lloyd and Verlaine built like a foundation, and then they build themselves up. You know, they got Fred Smith played bass. First it was Richard Hell, but then Fred Smith. And then they have this great drummer named Billy who plays drums, and he's more like a jazz drummer to me than, like, say, like a rock drummer. So there's so many great textures in television, and Richard Lloyd is very much part of that structure that made television a fantastic band. And interesting enough, Richard Lloyd's memoir, Everything is Combustible, is very clear-headed, very precise. He's a very good writer, and there's actually no messy sentences. There's no. It's very well edited too for a small press. The press is Beach Hill Publishing Company, which I am not familiar with. But the book is, you know, is very well designed. It's very well edited. Which you don't see often in a lot of musicians' memoirs. Sometimes the editing is quite sloppy. But this is quite remarkable. And the other thing I didn't know about Richard Lloyd is that he had a history of sorts. As a teenager, it was a surprise to me, he knew Jimi Hendrix. And he met Hendrix when Hendrix first came to New York. And he was not a close friend of his, but he went to all the shows, or the shows with the experience. And Lloyd and Hendrix had a common friend, and through this friend, introduced Lloyd to Hendrix and also invited Lloyd to see all the shows. So Lloyd went backstage and hung out with Hendrix and sort of studied Hendrix. This is another thing, he studies people. He studied Hendrix. That's the essence of what Hendrix is. And he also knew Keith Moon of The Who, and I was kind of surprised, you know, because when you think of the punk rock stuff, you think, you know, the punk rock was sort of like ground zero. Everything before that was totally discarded, and then everything afterwards is important. Or the present, and then afterward. But obviously Richard Lloyd not only knew about, of course, like everybody did then, and knew about rock and roll history and stuff, but he actually knew a lot of the key people. And that sort of surprised me. And I was very much taken by this book. It's a really, really good memoir. And I recommend it to not only fans of television, but of course, if you read Please Kill Me, Richard Lloyd's one of the I think like Dee Dee Ramone, Richard Lloyd, and Richard Hell, and I'm forgetting somebody else, but were the key voices in Please Kill Me. And that's another thing about Richard Lloyd's life I didn't know about him being a male hustler in New York at the time, like right before he started television or even the very beginning of television. So that's kind of fascinating to me that Richard Lloyd was hustling and sort of in part of the Warhol world a little bit in and out. But incredible book. I really enjoyed it. Everything is Combustible by Richard Lloyd. And again, I would recommend this for anybody who is a television fan or a fan of the New York music scene, or if you purchased a Terry Ork box set, Ork Records, New York, New York, for sure you need this book as well. It's sort of a companion piece to the music and that period of time and stuff. Great book. And this is Tosh Talks. I'm Tosh Berman, and I will see you very shortly. Oh, and if you can remember, if you wish you could, if you want and can and will, please subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.